In the endless void of the Forgotten Sector, where stars burned cold and distant, Jonah Kane had carved out a life of solitude. For 30 years, he'd been the sole keeper of the derelict space station Aurora's End *, a crumbling relic of humanity's once grand ambitions. The station, orbiting a nameless gas giant, was a labyrinth of rusted corridors, flickering lights, and the hum of ancient machinery that Jonah had nursed back to life with nothing but his wits and stubborn will. At 48, with salt and pepper hair and a face etched with lines of quiet defiance, Jonah was the last human in this forsaken corner of the galaxy. Earth was a distant memory, its fate unknown, its people scattered or gone. He didn't care to know anymore. The silence was his companion, the stars his only witnesses. Until tonight. The night began like any other. Jonah sat in the station's control room, a cavernous dome with a cracked viewport that offered a breathtaking view of the gas giant's swirling storms. He sipped synthetic coffee, bitter, but it was all he had, and tinkered with a salvaged radio receiver, chasing ghosts in the static. His hands, calloused from decades of repairs, moved with practiced precision. The station's systems were his symphony, and he was their reluctant conductor. Then, a sharp beep shattered the quiet. The proximity alarm, silent for years, screamed to life. Jonah froze, his heart pounding against ribs that hadn't felt such a jolt in decades. Something was out there. He scrambled to the console, his fingers flying over the controls. The external cameras, half-functional and grainy, flickered to life, revealing a sleek, shimmering craft spiraling toward the station. It was no human design. Its curves were too organic, its hull glowing with a faint, iridescent pulse. A ship from beyond. Jonah's breath caught. Aliens weren't unknown to him. He'd read the old logs, tales of first contact before Earth's fall. But in 30 years, no one had come to this dead-end sector. No one cared about a lone human on a broken station. Until now. The craft's trajectory was erratic, trailing sparks and smoke. It was going to crash. Jonah's instincts, honed by years of survival, kicked in. He activated the station's docking clamps, praying the ancient mechanisms still worked. The ship veered closer, its hull scraping against the station's outer ring with a screech that vibrated through the walls. Jonah braced himself, half expecting the impact to tear Aurора's End apart. But the clamps held, and the alien craft came to a shuddering halt in the docking bay. He grabbed his toolkit and a pulse pistol, more out of habit than intent, and sprinted through the station's corridors. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and metal as he reached the docking bay. The alien ship's hatch was already hissing open, releasing a plume of vapor. Jonah tightened his grip on the pistol, his pulse racing. He wasn't sure what to expect: hostile invaders, desperate scavengers, or something worse. But nothing could have prepared him for what stepped out. Two figures emerged, their silhouettes framed by the ship's glowing interior. They were women, or at least they appeared so, with an otherworldly grace that made Jonah's breath hitch. Their hair was a cascade of shimmering white, flowing like liquid starlight, and their skin was pale as moonlight, almost luminescent. Small, pointed ears, delicate as a fawn's, peeked through their tresses. Their attire, form-fitting, adorned with intricate silver patterns, clung to curves that seemed sculpted by a divine hand, both regal and impossibly alluring. One carried herself with a commanding air, her emerald eyes sharp and assessing, while the other moved with a softer, almost hesitant grace, her violet eyes wide with curiosity. They were, without question, the most beautiful beings Jonah had ever seen. "Human," the commanding one said, her voice a melodic cadence that seemed to resonate in his bones. "We seek refuge. Our ship is damaged, and we require shelter for the night. Will you grant us this?" Jonah blinked, his mind struggling to process the sight before him. 30 years of silence, and now this, two alien women, speaking his language, standing in his docking bay. His first instinct was to laugh, to assume this was some hallucination born of too many lonely nights. But the weight of their gaze, the faint hum of their ship, and the chill of the bay's air were all too real. "Who are you?" he managed, his voice rough from disuse. He lowered the pistol slightly, though his guard remained up. "I am Lyra, first princess of Auralis," the commanding one said, stepping forward. Her movements were fluid, almost predatory, yet her eyes held a flicker of desperation. "This is my sister, Zara, second princess. Our empire is in turmoil. We fled to survive. Your station is the only sanctuary in this sector." Jonah's eyes flicked to Zara, who offered a tentative smile, her fingers nervously twisting a strand of her luminous hair. "We mean no harm," she said softly, her voice like a breeze over water. "Please, we only need one night." One night. The words hung in the air, heavy with implications Jonah couldn't yet grasp. He'd lived alone for so long, his world reduced to circuits and solitude. Now these two princesses, beings from a world he couldn't imagine, were asking to share his space. His sanctuary, his life. "Why me?" he asked, his voice steadier now. "Why here?" Lyra's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. "Because you're human, and humans, we've heard, are capable of extraordinary things." Jonah's heart thudded. He didn't know if it was fear, curiosity, or something else entirely, a spark he hadn't felt in decades. He studied them, their elegance a stark contrast to the grime of his station. Every rational part of him screamed to send them away, to protect his fragile peace. But something deeper, something human, stirred within him, curiosity, hope, maybe even desire. "All right," he said finally, holstering the pistol. "One night, but you follow my rules. This station's old, and I'm the only one keeping it together." Lyra inclined her head, a gesture of gratitude that somehow felt regal. "You have our thanks, Jonah Kane." He froze. "How do you know my name?" Zara's violet eyes sparkled with mischief. "Your station's beacon still broadcasts. Weekly, but enough for us to hear. Jonah Kane, keeper of Aurora's End, it has a certain charm." Jonah's jaw tightened. The beacon. He'd forgotten it was still active, a relic from a time when he'd hoped someone might find him. Now someone had, and they weren't human. He led them through the station's dimly lit corridors, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Lyra moved with purpose, her eyes scanning every detail, while Zara lingered, her fingers brushing against the walls as if marveling at the station's decay. Jonah couldn't shake the feeling that their arrival was no accident. The galaxy was vast, and this sector was a graveyard. Yet here they were, two princesses of Auralis, seeking refuge with a man who'd given up on the universe. As they reached the living quarters, a cramped space with a cot, a table, and a jury-rigged heater, Jonah gestured inside. "This is it, not much, but it's warm. I'll get some food, if you eat what humans do." "We adapt," Lyra said, her tone carrying a hint of amusement. She stepped inside, her presence filling the small room like a star in a bottle. Zara followed, her gaze lingering on Jonah, a silent question in her eyes. He turned to leave, needing a moment to clear his head, but Lyra's voice stopped him. "Jonah," she said, her voice softer now, almost intimate. "You've lived alone for a long time. Why?" The question hit like a pulse blast. He met her gaze, those emerald eyes piercing through his defenses. For a moment, he saw not just a princess, but a woman who understood exile, who knew the weight of loss. "Surviving's easier alone," he said gruffly. "No one to disappoint." Zara tilted her head, her smile gentle but knowing. "And no one to surprise you, until now." Jonah didn't respond. He couldn't. Instead, he left them in the quarters and headed to the galley, his mind racing. Two alien princesses, exiled and desperate, had landed in his life. And something told him this night would change everything. Jonah's boots echoed through the narrow corridor as he made his way to the galley, the faint hum of Aurora's End's life support systems, a familiar pulse beneath his feet. His mind was a storm, churning with questions he hadn't dared ask in years. Who were these women? Lyra and Zara, princesses of Auralis? Why had they chosen his crumbling station, a speck of dust in the galaxy's forgotten corner? And why did their presence stir something in him, a heat he'd buried under 30 years of solitude? Their voices lingered in his thoughts, Lyra's commanding melody, Zara's soft, teasing lilt. He shook his head, trying to focus. Food. He'd promised them food. But the truth was, he needed distance, a moment to regain control over a heart that hadn't raced like this since he was a young man dreaming of Earth's skies. The galley was a small, utilitarian space, its shelves lined with vacuum-sealed rations and a few hydroponic herbs Jonah had coaxed into existence. He rummaged through the supplies, pulling out protein packs and a canister of synthesized broth. It wasn't gourmet, but it was sustenance. As he worked, the station's lights flickered, a reminder of its fragility. He muttered a curse under his breath, making a mental note to check the power relays later. The last thing he needed was a blackout with two alien princesses in his care. His hands paused over the broth canister. Care. The word felt foreign, heavy. For 3 decades, he'd cared only for himself and this station, a mechanical beast he'd tamed with sweat and ingenuity. Now, two beings from a world of starlight and empires had stepped into his orbit, their beauty as disarming as their desperation. He could still see Lyra's emerald eyes, sharp and searching, and Zara's violet gaze, soft yet piercing, as if she could see the man he'd been before solitude claimed him. Jonah's fingers tightened around the canister. He wasn't ready for this for them. A soft sound broke his reverie, a faint rustle, like silk brushing against metal. He turned, his pulse quickening, and found Zara standing in the galley's doorway. Her white hair shimmered under the dim lights, framing a face that was both delicate and impossibly alluring. Her attire, a silver-threaded bodysuit that hugged every curve, caught the faint glow, making her seem like a star given form. Those small, elfin ears twitched slightly, as if catching the hum of the station. She leaned against the frame, her posture relaxed yet deliberate, her violet eyes locked on him. "You move quietly," Jonah said, his voice rougher than he intended. He set the canister down, trying to ignore the way her presence filled the small space, the air suddenly warmer, heavier. Zara's lips curved into a smile, playful but with an edge of something deeper. "We learn to tread lightly in Auralis. Too many ears, too many eyes." She stepped closer, her movements fluid, almost hypnotic. "You're preparing food for us, that's kind of you." "It's just rations," Jonah muttered, turning back to the counter to hide the flush creeping up his neck. "Not exactly a feast fit for princesses." "Kindness is a feast in itself," she said, her voice soft but laced with a warmth that made his skin prickle. She was closer now, close enough that he caught a faint scent, something like jasmine and ozone, alien yet intoxicating. "You've lived here alone, haven't you, for so long?" Jonah's jaw tightened. He didn't want to talk about the years, the endless nights spent wrestling with memories of a world that no longer existed. "Gets the job done," he said, keeping his eyes on the rations. "No distractions." Zara tilted her head, her hair spilling over one shoulder like a cascade of starlight. "And now, are we distractions?" The question hung in the air, charged with a tension that made Jonah's pulse thrum. He turned to face her, meeting her gaze. Her eyes held a mix of curiosity and something else, something that made his blood run hotter, his thoughts less steady. Before he could answer, another presence entered the room. Lyra. She moved with a predator's grace, her emerald eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. Her attire mirrored Zara's, but where Zara's was soft and inviting, Lyra's seemed to command attention, the silver patterns catching the light like a crown. "Zara," Lyra said, her voice a low, melodic warning. "You're making our host uncomfortable." Zara's smile didn't waver. "Am I Jonah?" she asked, her tone teasing, her eyes never leaving his. Jonah cleared his throat, stepping back to put some distance between them. "I'm fine, just not used to company." He gestured to the rations. "Food's almost ready. You can eat in the quarters or here if you want." Lyra's gaze softened, though her posture remained regal. "We'll eat here," she said, her voice carrying a quiet authority. "It's been too long since we shared a meal with someone trustworthy." The word caught Jonah off guard. Trustworthy. He hadn't thought of himself that way in years. He was just a man keeping a dying station alive, a ghost in the galaxy. Yet these two women, princesses of a distant empire, looked at him as if he were something more. He didn't know whether to be flattered or suspicious. As they sat around the galley's small table, Jonah served the broth and protein packs, feeling oddly self-conscious under their scrutiny. Lyra ate with precise, elegant movements, her eyes occasionally flicking to Jonah, studying him. Zara, on the other hand, seemed fascinated by the meal, poking at the rations with a childlike curiosity that made Jonah's lips twitch in a rare smile. "This is different," Zara said, nibbling on a protein bar. "On Auralis, our food sings to the senses. Flavors dance, textures shift. This is solid, grounded, like you." Jonah raised an eyebrow. "Solid's one way to put it. Most would call it bland." Zara laughed, a sound like chimes in the wind, and Jonah felt that heat again, stirring in his chest. Lyra's gaze sharpened, but there was a hint of amusement in her expression. "Humans are known for their resilience," she said. "You make do with what you have, it's admirable." The compliment landed softly, but it carried weight. Jonah leaned back in his chair, studying them. "Keep talking about humans like you know us, but you're from Auralis. How do you even know my language, my name?" Lyra set down her spoon, her movements deliberate. "Our empire has studied your kind for centuries. Your signals, your stories, your tenacity. When we fled, we sought a human, someone who could survive alone, someone who wouldn't betray us to our enemies." "Enemies?" Jonah's voice hardened. "You didn't mention enemies when you asked to stay." Zara's smile faded and she glanced at Lyra, a silent exchange passing between them. Lyra leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Jonah's with an intensity that made his breath catch. "We are exiles," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "Our empire is fracturing. A faction seeks to claim the throne, and we are inconvenient. Our ship was sabotaged. We barely escaped with our lives." Jonah's mind raced. Exiles, sabotage, enemies. This wasn't just a night stay. He'd opened his station to two fugitives, and whatever hunted them could come knocking next. Yet, as he looked at Lyra's fierce determination and Zara's quiet vulnerability, he felt a pull, a need to protect them, to prove that humanity wasn't just a forgotten relic. "What kind of enemies?" he asked, his voice steady despite the storm in his chest. Lyra hesitated, then reached into a hidden fold of her attire, pulling out a small, crystalline device. It hummed softly, projecting a holographic image into the air, a fleet of angular, predatory ships, their hulls pulsing with a sickly green light. "The Dravex cabal," she said. "Mercenaries hired by our own kin. They'll track us, Jonah, and if they find us here—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Jonah's hand instinctively went to the pulse pistol at his hip. He'd faced isolation, starvation, and the station's countless breakdowns, but enemies? That was a fight he hadn't waged in years. Yet the thought of those ships, of danger coming for Lyra and Zara, ignited something fierce in him. "Then we make sure they don't find you," he said, his voice low, resolute. "This station's a maze. I've kept it hidden for 30 years. I can do it again." Zara's eyes widened, a spark of admiration in their violet depths. "You'd protect us, a stranger?" Jonah met her gaze, and for a moment the galaxy shrank to the space between them. "You're not strangers anymore," he said, the words surprising even himself. "You're my guests." Lyra's lips parted slightly, a flicker of something, gratitude perhaps, or something deeper crossing her face. She reached out, her fingers brushing Jonah's hand, her touch electric despite its brevity. "You are more than we expected, Jonah Kane," she murmured. Before he could respond, a sharp crackle echoed through the station. The lights flickered violently and the proximity alarm blared again. Jonah was on his feet in an instant, his heart pounding. "Stay here," he ordered, grabbing his toolkit and pistol. He sprinted to the control room, his mind racing with possibilities. Another ship, a malfunction, or something worse? As he reached the console, the cameras showed a faint glow on the horizon, a cluster of green lights moving fast. The Dravex cabal, they were here, and the night was far from over. The control room of Aurora's End was a chaos of flashing lights and screeching alarms, the air thick with the electric tang of overheating circuits. Jonah's hands danced across the console, his eyes locked on the external cameras as the cluster of green lights grew closer, sleek, predatory ships slicing through the void like knives through silk. The Dravex cabal. Their presence was a violation of the silence Jonah had guarded for 30 years, a threat to the fragile sanctuary he'd built from the wreckage of his past. His heart pounded, not just with fear, but with a primal, almost forgotten fire. A need to protect, to fight, to prove that humanity wasn't just a fading echo in the galaxy. He didn't hear Lyra and Zara approach until their shadows fell across the console, their luminous forms a stark contrast to the room's flickering gloom. Lyra's emerald eyes were sharp, her posture rigid with a warrior's readiness, while Zara's violet gaze flickered with a mix of fear and determination. Their presence, so close after decades of solitude, sent a jolt through Jonah, a reminder of how quickly his world had shifted. Just hours ago, he'd been alone. Now he was caught in a storm of alien intrigue with two princesses who stirred feelings he couldn't name. "You were told to stay in the galley," Jonah said, his voice gruff but lacking real bite. He didn't look at them, his focus on the screens as he rerouted power to the station's meager defenses, a pair of ancient pulse cannons he'd barely maintained. Lyra stepped closer, her silver-threaded bodysuit catching the console's glow, accentuating curves that made Jonah's throat tighten, despite the danger. "Don't hide while others fight for us," she said, her voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in his chest. "The Dravex are here for us, let us help." Jonah's fingers paused over the controls. He wanted to argue to send them back to safety, but the resolve in Lyra's eyes and the quiet strength in Zara's stopped him. They weren't just princesses, they were survivors like him. He nodded curtly. "Fine, but you follow my lead. This station's my turf." Zara's lips curved into a small, nervous smile, her elfin ears twitching slightly. "We trust you, Jonah," she said softly, her voice a soothing counterpoint to the alarms. The words landed like a spark, igniting something warm and reckless in him. Trust. When had anyone last trusted him? The screens flickered as the Dravex ships closed in, their hulls pulsing with that sickly green light. Jonah's mind raced, calculating angles and power reserves. Aurora's End was no warship, but it was a labyrinth, built to withstand meteor storms and pirate raids from humanity's lost era. He could use that. "I'm going to cloak the station," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "The stealth system's old, but it might buy us time." Lyra raised an eyebrow, her expression a mix of skepticism and intrigue. "Cloak, your technology is primitive. How can it evade the Dravex's scanners?" Jonah's lips twitched in a rare, defiant grin. "Primitive's my specialty. Watch and learn, princess." He activated the stealth array, a patchwork of scavenged tech he'd cobbled together over the years. The station groaned as power surged through long dormant circuits, the lights dimming to a faint glow. Outside, the cameras showed the station's hull shimmering, blending into the gas giant's stormy backdrop. The Dravex ships slowed, their formation scattering as if confused. Jonah's grin widened. Humans might be forgotten, but they were damn good at surviving. Zara leaned closer, her shoulder brushing against his, sending a shiver down his spine. "You're full of surprises," she murmured, her violet eyes gleaming with admiration. "How does a man alone for so long know such tricks?" "Necessity," Jonah said, his voice rougher than he meant. Her proximity, the faint jasmine ozone scent of her, was a distraction he couldn't afford. Yet he didn't pull away. Lyra's voice cut through the moment, sharp and urgent. "They are recalibrating. The cloak won't hold long." She pointed to the screen where one of the Dravex ships was emitting a scanning pulse, its green light sweeping across the void. Jonah cursed under his breath. The stealth system was a gamble, and time was running out. "Then we fight," he said, flipping switches to arm the pulse cannons. The weapons were outdated, but they could still pack a punch if aimed right. He turned to Lyra and Zara, his gaze steady. "You said you wanted to help. Ever manned a cannon?" Lyra's lips curved into a dangerous smile, her emerald eyes alight with a fire that made Jonah's pulse race. "In Auralis, we train for war as much as diplomacy. Show me." Zara hesitated, her fingers twisting a strand of her starlit hair. "I'm not a fighter," she admitted, her voice soft but resolute. "But I can monitor the systems, warn you if they break through." Jonah nodded, impressed despite himself. "Good. Zara, you're on the console. Lyra with me." He led Lyra to the cannon bay, a cramped chamber lined with control panels and a viewport showing the approaching enemy. The air was thick with tension, the hum of the cannons charging like a heartbeat. Lyra slid into the gunner's seat with a grace that belied her inexperience with human tech, her fingers hovering over the controls as Jonah explained the basics. "Point and shoot," he said, his voice low as he leaned over her, their faces inches apart. "Aim for their engines. We don't need to win, just slow them down." Lyra's eyes met his, and for a moment the galaxy faded, the alarms, the danger, the years of loneliness. There was only her, fierce and radiant, a woman who could command empires yet chose to fight beside him. "I understand," she said, her voice a husky whisper that sent heat curling through him. A sudden jolt rocked the station, the viewport flashing as a Dravex ship fired a warning shot. Jonah snapped back to reality, his hands flying to the second cannon's controls. "Zara status," he shouted through the comms. "They're locking on," Zara's voice crackled back, tinged with panic. "The cloak's failing." Jonah's jaw clenched. He fired a burst from his cannon, the pulse of energy streaking through the void and grazing one of the Dravex ships. It veered off, but the others adjusted, their green lights pulsing faster. Lyra followed suit, her shots precise, her focus unshakable. The station shuddered as another hit landed, sparks flying from a nearby panel. "We can't take much more," Zara called. "Jonah, there's a signal, something buried in the station's core. It's not human." Jonah froze, his hand still on the controls. A signal? After 30 years, he knew every inch of Aurora's end, or so he'd thought. "What kind of signal?" he demanded, dodging another blast that shook the cannon bay. "It's old," Zara said, her voice trembling with excitement. "Alien, powerful. It's been dormant, but the Dravex's scans must have triggered it. Jonah, it's coming from the lower levels." Lyra's head snapped toward him, her eyes wide. "Auralian tech," she breathed. "It has to be. Our ancestors explored this sector centuries ago. If it's what I think." She didn't finish, but the implication hit Jonah like a shockwave. A hidden alien signal, buried in his station, powerful enough to draw the Dravex's attention. And now, it was awake. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. A secret that could change everything, or destroy them all. "Keep firing," Jonah barked, his mind racing. He and Lyra unleashed a barrage, their cannons lighting up the void. One Dravex ship exploded in a brilliant flash, but the others pressed closer, their scans intensifying. The station groaned, its hull straining under the assault. Jonah's heart pounded, not just from the fight, but from the weight of what Zara had found. A signal, a mystery, a chance to be more than a lone survivor. "Jonah," Zara's voice cut through the chaos. "The signal, it's broadcasting, it's calling something." Before Jonah could respond, the viewport flared with a new light, not green, but a deep, pulsating blue. A massive shape emerged from the gas giant's storms, its silhouette vast and unfamiliar, dwarfing the Dravex ships. It wasn't human, it wasn't Dravex, and it was heading straight for Aurora's end. Jonah's breath caught, his eyes locked on the approaching unknown. Lyra's hand brushed his, a fleeting touch that grounded him in the chaos. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice a mix of awe and fear. "I don't know," Jonah said, his voice steady despite the storm in his chest. But we're about to find out. Thank you for the enthusiasm. I'm thrilled you're enjoying the story so far. Below is Part 4, crafted to heighten the drama, introduce awkward situations, and sprinkle in a touch of humor, as per your instructions. The narrative flows seamlessly from Part 3, picking up right after the mysterious blue-lit entity emerges from the gas giant storms, ensuring no jarring breaks disrupt the viewer's immersion. The plot remains consistent, blending HFY, sci-fi intrigue, and romantic tension with a dash of levity to keep the audience hooked. The language is natural, evocative, and accessible, staying within YouTube's monetization guidelines while amplifying the emotional stakes and awkward, humorous moments. The control room of Aurora's End was a crucible of tension, the air thick with the acrid scent of sparking circuits and the pulse of adrenaline. Jonah's eyes were glued to the viewport, where the massive, blue-lit silhouette loomed closer, its form still shrouded in the gas giant's swirling storms. It was no ship, not like the sleek, predatory Dravex vessels that still hovered menacingly in the distance, their green lights flickering as if wary of this new intruder. This was something else, something ancient, its presence a weight that pressed against Jonah's chest. Beside him, Lyra's emerald eyes burned with a mix of awe and calculation, her body tense as she gripped the cannon controls. Zara, at the console, was a flurry of motion, her fingers dancing over the screens as she tried to make sense of the alien signal now screaming through the station's systems. "What the hell is that thing?" Jonah muttered, his voice a low growl. His hands hovered over the controls, torn between firing at the Dravex or preparing for whatever this new entity might bring. 30 years of solitude hadn't prepared him for this. A firefight, 2 alien princesses, and now a cosmic mystery unfolding on his doorstep. Lyra's gaze flicked to him, her lips parting as if to answer, but Zara's voice cut through, sharp and breathless. The signals amplifying. She called, her violet eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement. "It's Auralian, Jonah, definitely Auralian. But it's older than our empire. It's calling that thing out there." Jonah's mind raced. An Auralian signal, buried in his station for who knows how long, now awake and summoning a behemoth from the void. He glanced at Lyra, whose regal composure was fraying, her small, elfin ears twitching with agitation. "You knew about this?" he asked, his tone sharp but not accusing. "You said your ancestors explored this sector. What's this signal, Lyra?" She hesitated, her fingers tightening on the controls. "I suspected," she admitted, her voice low, almost intimate despite the chaos. "Our legends speak of a lost outpost, a guardian left to protect Auralis' secrets. We thought it was myth. But if it's real," she trailed off, her eyes locking onto the approaching entity, its blue light now pulsing in rhythm with the station's alarms. Jonah's jaw clenched. Myths, guardians, secrets. He'd signed up for a knight's hospitality, not a galactic conspiracy. But before he could press her further, the station lurched violently, the floor tilting as a Dravex ship fired a precise shot that grazed the hull. Sparks erupted from a nearby panel, and Zara yelped, ducking as a shower of sparks rained down. Jonah lunged to her side, pulling her away from the console, his arm instinctively wrapping around her waist. Her body was warm against his, her jasmine ozone scent flooding his senses, and for a fleeting moment he forgot the danger. "You okay?" he asked, his voice rough as he steadied her. Zara's violet eyes met his, wide and unguarded, her breath catching as she nodded. Her hand rested on his chest, lingering just a second too long, and Jonah felt a heat he hadn't known in decades. "Focus, human," Lyra snapped, though her tone carried a hint of amusement. She fired the cannon, her shot striking a Dravex ship's wing, sending it spinning. "Unless you plan to woo my sister in the middle of a battle." Jonah's face flushed, and he released Zara, stepping back to the controls with a gruff cough. "Just keeping her alive," he muttered, ignoring the way Zara's lips twitched into a shy smile. Awkward didn't begin to cover it. Here he was, a grizzled hermit, caught between 2 alien princesses who seemed to unravel him with every glance, while the galaxy threw a war at his doorstep. And yet, their presence, Lyra's fierce command, Zara's gentle warmth, made him feel more alive than he had in years. The blue-lit entity was closer now, its form resolving into a colossal structure, part ship, part organic, its surface rippling like liquid metal. It dwarfed the Dravex ships, which scattered like startled fish, their green lights dimming as they retreated. Jonah's breath caught. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't here to play nice. "Zara, can you shut that signal down?" he asked, his voice steady despite the chaos. "If it's calling that thing, we need to stop it before we're caught in the crossfire." Zara nodded, her fingers flying over the console. I'm trying, but it's locked into the station's core. It's like it wants to be heard. Her voice trembled, but her focus was unwavering, her white hair glowing under the console's light. Jonah couldn't help but admire her, fragile yet fierce, a princess who didn't shy from a fight. Lyra's voice broke his thoughts. The Dravex are regrouping, she said, her eyes narrowing as she tracked their movements on the screen. They're not fleeing, they want the signal too. Jonah cursed under his breath. Of course they did. A lost Auralian artifact, powerful enough to summon a cosmic guardian, was a prize worth killing for. He glanced at the viewport, where the blue entity was now close enough to reveal intricate patterns etched into its surface, symbols that matched the silver designs on Lyra and Zara's attire. This was no coincidence. Their arrival, the signal, the guardian, it was all connected. We need to get to the core, Jonah said, his mind made up. If that signal's in the station's heart, we shut it down manually, before the Dravex or that thing out there decide we're expendable. Lyra's eyes met his, a spark of respect in their emerald depths. You'd risk your station for us? It's not just about you, Jonah said, though his gaze lingered on her, then Zara. This is my home. I'm not letting anyone, alien or otherwise, tear it apart. Zara's smile was soft, almost mischievous. You're very human, Jonah. It's endearing. Jonah snorted, a rare laugh escaping him despite the tension. Endearing's a new one. Come on, let's move. He grabbed his toolkit and pulse pistol, motioning for them to follow. The station's core was deep in its bowels, a maze of corridors and forgotten chambers. Getting there during a siege was madness, but madness was all Jonah had left. As they navigated the station's twisting passages, the walls shuddered with distant impacts, the Dravex ships testing the station's defenses. Lyra moved with a predator's grace, her eyes scanning for threats, while Zara stayed close to Jonah, her presence a quiet anchor. The air grew colder as they descended, the lights dimmer, the hum of machinery louder. Jonah led the way, his steps sure despite the years since he'd ventured this deep. The core was a relic, a fusion reactor that powered Aurora's End's lifeblood. If the signal was there, it was no accident. They reached a sealed bulkhead, its surface scarred with age. Jonah knelt, prying open a control panel with his toolkit. This hasn't been opened in decades, he muttered, his hands working fast. Hope you're ready for a little dust. Zara leaned over his shoulder, her breath warm against his neck. Dust is better than Dravex, she said, her tone light but her eyes nervous. You're good with your hands, aren't you? Jonah's fingers fumbled, a bolt slipping from his grasp. He shot her a look, caught off guard by the playful glint in her violet eyes. You trying to distract me, princess? Maybe, she said, her smile widening. Is it working? Lyra's exasperated sigh cut through the moment. Zara, behave, we're not on Auralis, flirting our way out of danger. But her lips twitched, betraying a hint of amusement. Jonah shook his head, a grin tugging at his mouth despite the stakes. You too are trouble, he said, finally opening the bulkhead with a hiss of pressurized air. The chamber beyond was vast, a cathedral of machinery, its center dominated by the glowing core, a pulsating orb of energy that cast eerie shadows. And there, embedded in the core's housing, was a crystalline device, its surface etched with Auralian symbols, pulsing in sync with the blue entity outside. Lyra gasped, her composure breaking. The Heart of Auralis, she whispered. It's real. Before Jonah could ask what she meant, the station rocked violently, a deafening explosion echoing from above. The Dravex had breached the outer hull. Alarms screamed, and Zara grabbed Jonah's arm, her touch both frantic and grounding. They're inside, she said, her voice trembling. Jonah's heart pounded, his human stubbornness flaring. He'd survived 30 years alone. He wasn't about to lose his station or his guests now. We shut that thing down, he said, pointing to the crystal. Then we deal with the intruders. Ready? Lyra nodded, her eyes fierce. Zara squeezed his arm, her smile brave despite her fear. With you, Jonah, always. As they approached the core, the blue entity's light flooded the viewport, its presence a silent promise of chaos. And somewhere above, the Dravex were closing in, their footsteps echoing like a death knell. The chamber housing the Heart of Auralis thrummed with an otherworldly energy, its crystalline core pulsing like a living star, casting sapphire shadows across the cavernous space. Jonah stood at its edge, his pulse racing as the station's alarms wailed, a relentless reminder of the Dravex mercenaries now prowling Aurora's End's corridors. The air was heavy with the scent of molten metal and ozone, the core's heat wrapping around him like a second skin. Lyra and Zara stood close, their luminous forms a stark contrast to the chamber's industrial decay, Lyra's emerald eyes fierce with determination, Zara's violet gaze flickering with a mix of fear and resolve. The Heart's light danced across their silver-threaded attire, highlighting curves that seemed to defy the chaos around them, pulling Jonah's thoughts to places he hadn't ventured in decades. The station shook again, a muffled explosion reverberating from above. The Dravex were closing in, their footsteps a distant but growing thunder. Jonah's hand tightened on his pulse pistol, his other clutching the toolkit he'd carried like a lifeline for 30 years. "We don't have much time," he said, his voice low but steady. "That crystal's calling something, and it's brought trouble. We need to shut it down now." Lyra stepped toward the heart, her movements fluid, almost hypnotic as she studied the glowing artifact. "It's more than a signal," she murmured, her voice a sultry hum that seemed to resonate with the core's pulse. "The Heart of Auralis is a beacon, a key to our empire's lost power. If we can control it," she trailed off, her fingers hovering over the crystal, close enough to feel its warmth but not daring to touch. Zara moved closer to Jonah, her shoulder brushing his, her jasmine ozone scent filling the air between them. "It's dangerous," she said softly, her violet eyes searching his. "But it's also alive. Feels us, Jonah, it feels you." Her words carried a weight that made his skin prickle, her gaze holding an intensity that was both vulnerable and inviting. Jonah swallowed, his throat dry. The core's light bathed Zara's face, making her white hair glow like a halo, her small, elfin ears twitching slightly as if attuned to the heart's rhythm. He forced himself to focus, to ignore the heat stirring in his chest, a heat not just from the core, but from her proximity, her trust, the way her breath hitched when their eyes met. "Feels me?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "What's that supposed to mean?" Lyra turned, her emerald eyes narrowing, though a faint smile played on her lips. "Humans," she said, her tone a mix of amusement and something deeper, more primal. "Your kind has a resonance. The heart was designed to respond to strong wills, to those who endure. You've survived alone for 30 years, Jonah. That's no small thing." The compliment landed like a spark, igniting a warmth that spread through him, mingling with the adrenaline of the moment. He wanted to dismiss it, to focus on the danger, but the way Lyra's gaze lingered, the way Zara's hand brushed his arm, made it impossible to ignore the pull between them. 30 years of solitude had built walls around his heart, but these two women, princesses from a world of starlight, were tearing them down with every glance, every touch. Another explosion rocked the station, closer this time, the walls trembling as dust rained from the ceiling. Jonah snapped back to reality, his grip tightening on the pistol. "Flattery's nice, but it won't stop the Dravex," he said, his tone gruff but tinged with a wry humor. "Let's move. Zara, can you interface with that thing?" Zara nodded, stepping toward the core, her fingers trembling as she reached for the crystal. "I'll try," she said, her voice soft but resolute. She placed her hands on the heart, and a low hum filled the chamber, the light intensifying until it bathed them all in a sapphire glow. Jonah's breath caught as Zara's body arched slightly, her lips parting in a silent gasp, her eyes fluttering closed. The sight was mesmerizing, her form outlined in radiant light, her silver attire clinging to her like a second skin, every curve accentuated in a way that made Jonah's pulse race. Lyra moved to her sister's side, her hand resting on Zara's shoulder, her touch both protective and grounding. "Careful," she whispered, her voice a low caress. "The heart can overwhelm you." Jonah watched, torn between awe and unease. The air seemed to thicken, charged with an energy that was both electric and intimate, as if the heart was weaving them together in its glow. He stepped closer, his instincts urging him to protect Zara, to pull her back from whatever force gripped her. "Is she okay?" he asked, his voice tight. Lyra's eyes met his, and for a moment the chaos faded, the alarms, the Dravex, the looming guardian outside. There was only her, fierce and radiant, her gaze holding a promise that made his blood sing. "She's communing with the heart," Lyra said, her voice low, almost a purr. "It's intense, like touching a star." Jonah's eyes flicked to Zara, whose body trembled slightly, her breathing shallow, her lips parted as if caught in a dream. The sight stirred something deep within him, a longing he hadn't felt since youth, a need to connect, to feel, to be more than a solitary survivor. He reached out, his hand hovering near Zara's, not daring to touch but unable to pull away. "What's it doing to her?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's bonding," Lyra said, stepping closer until her body was inches from his, her warmth radiating through the narrow space between them. "The heart seeks a connection, a harmony. It's drawn to her and to you." Her words were laced with a suggestive edge, her emerald eyes searching his, as if daring him to acknowledge the pull they all felt. Jonah's heart thudded, the air between them charged with an unspoken tension. Lyra's proximity, her scent, her intensity, it was overwhelming, yet he couldn't look away. Zara's eyes fluttered open, her violet gaze locking onto his, and the connection was electric, a silent understanding passing between them. "Jonah," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "It's beautiful. It's showing me things, memories, possibilities. Us. Us." Jonah repeated, his voice hoarse. The word hung in the air, heavy with meaning, as the core's light pulsed faster, its hum rising to a crescendo. He felt exposed, raw, as if the heart was peeling back his defenses, revealing desires he'd buried long ago. Before he could process it, the chamber shook violently, a deafening crash echoing from the corridor. The Dravex had found them. Jonah spun, his pistol raised, as the bulkhead door groaned, sparks flying as something heavy battered it from the other side. Lyra's hand shot to a sleek, curved dagger at her hip, its blade glinting with an alien sheen. "They're here," she said, her voice a low growl, her body poised for battle. Zara stumbled back from the heart, her face flushed, her breathing uneven. "I can't stop it," she gasped, her eyes wide with panic. "The signal's locked. It's calling the Guardian closer." Jonah's mind raced. The Dravex at the door, the Guardian outside, the heart binding them in its intoxicating glow. It was too much, too fast. Yet the sight of Zara's vulnerability, Lyra's fierce resolve, fueled something primal in him. He wasn't just a survivor anymore. He was a protector, a man who'd found something worth fighting for. "Stay behind me," he said, stepping in front of them, his pistol aimed at the door. "We hold them off until we figure this out." Lyra's lips curved into a dangerous smile, her dagger gleaming as she took her place beside him. "You don't fight alone, Jonah," she said, her voice a sultry challenge. "Not anymore." Zara pressed close, her hand finding his, her touch a spark that grounded him in the chaos. "We're with you," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. The door buckled, a jagged tear splitting its surface as Dravex claws, mechanical and razor-sharp, forced their way through. Jonah's heart pounded, but it wasn't just fear driving him now. It was the heat of the moment, the connection with these two women who'd crashed into his life, the promise of something more. As the Dravex poured in, their eyes glowing with malevolent intent, Jonah fired, his shots precise, his human stubbornness a fire that refused to die. The core chamber of Aurora's end was a battlefield, the air thick with the screech of metal and the acrid sting of plasma burns. The Heart of Auralis pulsed wildly, its sapphire light casting frenetic shadows as Jonah fired his pulse pistol, each shot a defiant roar against the Dravex mercenaries pouring through the breached bulkhead. Their mechanical claws glinted, their eyes glowing with a predatory malice that made Jonah's blood run cold. Beside him, Lyra wielded her alien dagger with lethal precision, her movements a dance of grace and fury, her silver-threaded bodysuit shimmering as she struck down a Dravex drone. Zara pressed close to Jonah, her hands trembling but steady as she clutched a salvaged tool, ready to defend herself despite her fear. The heart's hum was a relentless pulse, binding them in its glow, amplifying the heat of their connection even as death clawed at the door. Jonah's shots found their mark, sending a Dravex soldier staggering back, its armor sparking. "Keep them at the choke point," he shouted, his voice raw but commanding. The narrow entrance to the chamber was their only advantage, a bottleneck that forced the Dravex to attack in waves. Lyra's dagger flashed, severing a mechanical limb, and she glanced at Jonah, her emerald eyes blazing with a fire that made his heart stutter. "You fight like you were born for this," she said, her voice a sultry growl amidst the chaos. "Surviving's my specialty," Jonah shot back, a grim smile tugging at his lips. He dodged a swipe from a Dravex claw, his body moving on instinct honed by years of wrestling with the station's breakdowns. Zara's hand brushed his arm, her touch a fleeting anchor, her violet eyes wide with a mix of awe and desperation. "Jonah, the heart, it's getting stronger," she cried, her voice trembling as the crystal's light surged, bathing the chamber in a blinding glow. The station shook, a deep tremor that sent dust cascading from the ceiling. Outside, the blue-lit Guardian loomed closer, its massive form now visible through the chamber's viewport, a colossal entity of liquid metal and organic curves, its surface etched with Auralian symbols that pulsed in sync with the heart. Jonah's stomach twisted. The Dravex, the heart, the Guardian, it was all converging, and he was caught in the middle with two princesses who'd turned his solitary world upside down. "Zara, any luck shutting that thing down?" Jonah asked, firing another shot as a Dravex soldier lunged, its claws grazing his shoulder. Pain flared, but he gritted his teeth, refusing to falter. Zara shook her head, her white hair glowing under the heart's light, her elfin ears twitching with agitation. "It's fighting me," she said, her voice strained. "It's alive, Jonah. It's not just a machine, it's choosing." "Choosing what?" Lyra snapped, her dagger slicing through another drone. She spun to face Zara, her expression a mix of frustration and fear. "We need to stop it before the Guardian decides we're a threat." Before Zara could answer, the heart let out a deafening pulse, a sound like 1,000 voices whispering at once. The chamber's lights flickered, and the Dravex froze, their glowing eyes dimming as if stunned. Jonah's breath caught, his pistol still raised, his eyes darting between the intruders and the heart. The air grew heavy, charged with an energy that made his skin prickle, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Then, the twist came, a revelation that shattered everything Jonah thought he knew. The heart's light coalesced into a holographic figure, a towering, ethereal woman with features eerily similar to Lyra and Zara, white hair, elfin ears, and eyes that shimmered like twin galaxies. Her presence was both majestic and terrifying, her voice resonating through the chamber like a chorus of stars. "I am the keeper of Auralis," she declared, her gaze sweeping over them. "And you, Jonah Kane, are no stranger to me." Jonah's heart stopped. The Dravex remained frozen, their mechanical forms eerily still, as if the keeper's presence held them in thrall. Lyra and Zara stared, their faces pale, their bodies rigid with shock. "What the hell does that mean?" Jonah demanded, his voice hoarse, his pistol trembling in his hand. "I've been alone for 30 years, I've never seen you or this thing." The keeper's eyes softened, a flicker of something almost human in their depths. "You were chosen," she said, her voice a haunting melody. "Long before you were born, the Auralians seeded this station with the heart, a failsafe to protect our legacy. It was programmed to find a guardian, a human with the strength to endure, to protect. Your solitude, your survival, was no accident. The heart called you here, Jonah. It shaped your path." Jonah's mind reeled, the words hitting like a pulse blast. Chosen? Shaped? He'd come to Aurora's end as a young man, fleeing Earth's collapse, believing it was chance that led him to this forgotten station. 30 years of isolation, of scavenging and surviving, had been his crucible. But to learn it was orchestrated, that an alien intelligence had guided his life, was a betrayal he couldn't process. "You're saying I'm, what, a puppet?" He growled, his voice thick with anger and disbelief. Lyra stepped closer, her hand reaching for his, her touch warm and grounding despite the chaos. "Not a puppet," she said softly, her emerald eyes searching his. "A protector. The heart chose you because you're human, because you endure where others would break." Zara moved to his other side, her fingers brushing his arm, her violet eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "We didn't know," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "We thought we found you by chance, but now it feels like fate." Jonah's chest tightened, the weight of their words, their touches, overwhelming. The keeper's hologram flickered, her gaze settling on Lyra and Zara. "You, daughters of Auralis, were drawn here to awaken the heart, but only together with the human can you wield its power. The guardian outside is yours to command, but only if you bond as one." "Bond?" Jonah repeated, his voice rough, his mind still grappling with the revelation. The word carried a weight that made his blood heat, especially as Lyra's hand lingered on his, her thumb tracing a slow, deliberate circle against his skin. Zara's touch was softer, her fingers intertwining with his, her warmth a quiet promise. The air between them crackled, the heart's light amplifying the tension, drawing them closer in a way that felt both inevitable and dangerous. The keeper's voice softened, almost intimate. "A bond of will, of trust of heart. The heart requires unity, a merging of human and Auralian strength. Only then can you stop the Dravex and command the guardian." Jonah's breath hitched. The implications were staggering, a bond, not just of strategy or survival, but something deeper, more intimate. He looked at Lyra, her fierce beauty a challenge he couldn't resist, then at Zara, her gentle warmth a balm to his scarred soul. The idea of being chosen, of being part of something greater, was both exhilarating and terrifying. But the Dravex were stirring, their eyes flickering back to life, and the Guardian's blue light pulsed ominously through the viewport. "We don't have time for this," Jonah said, his voice steady despite the storm in his chest. "If we're bonding, we do it now, tell me how." The keeper's hologram shimmered, her smile enigmatic. "Touch the heart together. Let it see you, human and Auralian united." Lyra's eyes met Jonah's, a silent question in their emerald depths. Zara's hand tightened in his, her breath catching. The Dravex lunged, their claws screeching against the floor, and Jonah knew there was no turning back. He nodded, his resolve hardening. "Do it," he said, his voice a low growl. Together they stepped toward the heart, their hands outstretched. As their fingers brushed the crystal, a surge of energy coursed through them, a connection that was both electric and profound, binding them in a way that transcended words. The chamber erupted in light, the Dravex froze mid-strike, and the guardian outside let out a resonant hum that shook the station to its core. Jonah felt them, Lyra's fire, Zara's warmth, the heart's ancient power, merging with his own stubborn humanity. And then the twist deepened. The keeper's voice echoed, not in the chamber but in his mind. "You are the key, Jonah Kane. The heart is yours, and so are they." The core chamber of Aurora's end vibrated with the Heart of Auralis' radiant energy, its sapphire light pulsing like a living heartbeat, binding Jonah, Lyra, and Zara in a moment that felt both eternal and fragile. Their hands rested on the crystal, fingers intertwined, a surge of warmth and power coursing through them. Jonah's rugged humanity, Lyra's fierce resolve, Zara's gentle strength, all merging into something greater. The keeper's voice echoed in Jonah's mind. Her words, "You are the key, Jonah Kane. The heart is yours, and so are they," lingering like a promise and a challenge. The Dravex soldiers stood frozen mid-attack, their mechanical claws glinting in the eerie glow, held in stasis by the heart's will. Outside, the colossal guardian loomed, its blue-lit form a silent sentinel through the viewport, its presence a weight that pressed against Jonah's chest. He pulled his hand back from the heart, the connection breaking with a jolt that left him breathless. Lyra and Zara did the same, their faces flushed, their eyes wide with a mix of awe and uncertainty. The air between them crackled, charged with an intimacy that made Jonah's skin tingle. He'd spent 30 years alone, his world reduced to circuits and solitude, yet now he stood at the center of a cosmic storm, bound to two alien princesses who looked at him as if he were more than a survivor, as if he were theirs. "What just happened?" Jonah asked, his voice rough, his gaze flicking between Lyra's emerald eyes and Zara's violet ones. The heart's hum had softened, but its light still bathed them, casting their silver-threaded bodysuits in a glow that highlighted every curve, every movement. He tried to focus, to ignore the heat stirring in his chest, but their proximity was a distraction he couldn't shake. Lyra's lips curved into a slow, knowing smile, her elfin ears twitching slightly. "The heart accepted us," she said, her voice a low, sultry hum that sent a shiver down Jonah's spine. "We're bound now, Jonah, you, me, Zara, the guardian outside, it answers to us, to you." Zara stepped closer, her hand brushing Jonah's arm, her touch soft but electric. "It's more than that," she murmured, her violet eyes shimmering with emotion. "The heart, it showed me something. A future, together." Her words were hesitant, almost shy, but they carried a weight that made Jonah's heart thud. Her white hair glowed under the heart's light, and the way her bodysuit clung to her form was a reminder of her otherworldly beauty, a beauty that felt both unattainable and dangerously close. Jonah's throat tightened. A future together? The idea was absurd, intoxicating, terrifying. He was a grizzled hermit, a man who'd forgotten how to connect, yet these two princesses looked at him with a trust, a desire that unraveled his defenses. "You're saying this thing," he gestured to the heart, "wants us to, what? Play house while the Dravex try to tear my station apart." Lyra's laugh was sharp, a burst of sound that cut through the tension. "Play house?" she repeated, her tone teasing but with a dangerous edge. "You humans are so quaint. The heart doesn't care about your domestic dreams, Jonah. It wants unity, strength, a bond to wield its power." Zara's cheeks flushed and she bit her lip, a gesture that was both endearing and maddeningly distracting. "It's not just power," she said softly. "It's us. The heart saw something in you. Jonah, something we see too." The words hit like a pulse blast, and Jonah felt his face heat, an awkward flush he hadn't known since his youth. He turned away, rubbing the back of his neck, trying to regain control. "Yeah, well, maybe the heart's got bad taste," he muttered, his voice gruff but tinged with a reluctant humor. "I'm just a guy trying to keep this rust bucket running, not some cosmic hero." Zara's giggle was like chimes in the wind, and even Lyra's lips twitched, her regal composure softening. "Bad taste?" Zara said, stepping closer until her warmth was a tangible presence. "I think it chose rather well." Her fingers brushed his, a fleeting touch that sent a spark through him, and Jonah's resolve wavered, caught between duty and the pull of her gaze. Before he could respond, the chamber shook violently, the frozen Dravex soldiers twitching as the heart's stasis began to falter. A low, mechanical growl filled the air, and Jonah's instincts kicked in. "Trouble's waking up," he said, raising his pulse pistol. "We need to move. If that guardian's ours to command, let's figure out how before these bastards overrun us." Lyra nodded, her dagger at the ready, her posture shifting back to that of a warrior. "The heart's controls are intuitive," she said, her voice steady despite the growing threat. "We need to focus together to direct the guardian, but it requires closeness." "Closeness?" Jonah repeated, his eyebrows shooting up. The word was loaded, and the way Lyra's eyes lingered on him, the way Zara's hand still hovered near his, made it clear this wasn't just about strategy. "You mean like holding hands and singing songs?" Zara laughed, a sound that was both nervous and genuine, easing the tension for a moment. "Not quite," she said, her violet eyes sparkling with mischief. "It's more intimate. The heart needs our emotions, our connection, like when we touched it before." Jonah's mind flashed to that moment, the surge of energy, the way their touches had felt like a current, binding them in a way that was both exhilarating and overwhelming. He cleared his throat, trying to ignore the heat creeping up his neck. "Right, so we stand around feeling things while the Dravex carve us up." "Great plan." Lyra's smile was wicked, her emerald eyes glinting with challenge. "You're braver than you pretend, Jonah Kane. Don't tell me a little closeness scares you more than mercenaries." The taunt hit its mark, and Jonah's lips twitched in a reluctant grin. "Lady, I've faced worse than your flirting," he said, though his voice betrayed a hint of flustered amusement. "Let's do this before I regret it." They turned back to the heart, but the Dravex were stirring faster now, their claws scraping against the floor. Jonah fired a warning shot, the pulse blast echoing as it struck a drone's chest, slowing its advance. "Zara, talk to me," he said, his eyes scanning the chamber. "How do we make this work?" Zara's fingers hovered over the heart, her face flushed with concentration. "We need to touch it again," she said, her voice trembling with urgency. "All of us, focus on us, on what we feel. The heart will amplify it. Send it to the Guardian." Jonah hesitated, the Dravex's growls growing louder, their eyes flaring back to life. The idea of bearing his emotions, of letting the heart see the tangled mess of longing and fear inside him, was daunting. But Lyra's hand found his, her grip firm, her touch igniting a warmth that steadied him. Zara's hand joined theirs, her fingers soft but resolute, and the three of them stepped closer to the heart, their bodies pressed together in the cramped space. The contact was electric, a rush of sensation that made Jonah's breath catch. Lyra's strength, Zara's warmth, their combined presence, it was overwhelming, a connection that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. He closed his eyes, focusing on the feel of their hands, the shared purpose that bound them. The heart hummed, its light flaring, and Jonah felt it, a surge of power, of unity, flowing through them. Outside, the Guardian's blue light pulsed in response, its massive form shifting, turning toward the Dravex ships. But the moment was shattered by a deafening roar as the Dravex broke free, their leader, a towering figure with a biomechanical exoskeleton, charging forward. Jonah yanked his hand free, raising his pistol, but Lyra was faster, her dagger slicing through the air. The blade struck the leader's arm, sparking against its armor, but it barely slowed. Zara yelped, stumbling back, and Jonah caught her, his arm wrapping around her waist, her body soft and warm against his. "Stay close," he shouted, firing at the leader. The shot grazed its shoulder, but the Dravex was relentless, its claws aiming for Zara. Lyra lunged, tackling the creature with a ferocity that took Jonah by surprise, her body a blur of motion. The chamber descended into chaos, the heart's light pulsing wildly, the Guardian's hum growing louder outside. In the midst of the fight, Zara's voice cut through, breathless and urgent. "Jonah, it's working, the Guardian's moving." She pointed to the viewport, where the colossal entity was now engaging the Dravex ships, its blue energy lancing through the void, scattering their formation. Jonah's heart pounded, torn between the fight and the sight of the Guardian's power. "Keep it going," he called, dodging a Dravex claw. He glanced at Lyra, who was grappling with the leader, her dagger locked against its armor. "Lyra, you good?" She shot him a fierce grin, her hair wild, her eyes blazing. "Never better," she panted, twisting the dagger free. "But your station's a mess, human." Jonah laughed, a raw, reckless sound. "Tell me about it," he said, firing another shot. The Dravex leader staggered, and for a moment hope flared. But the heart's light flickered, and Zara gasped, her hands trembling on the crystal. "It's slipping," she said, her voice panicked. "We need more, Jonah, more of us." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication, as the Dravex closed in and the Guardian's power wavered. Jonah knew what she meant, more emotion, more connection, more of the bond that had sparked when they touched the heart. And as he looked at Lyra and Zara, fighting beside him, he realized he was ready to give it. The core chamber of Aurora's end was a maelstrom of light and sound, the Heart of Auralis pulsing erratically as its sapphire glow flickered like a dying star. Jonah's pulse pistol roared, each shot a defiant cry against the Dravex mercenaries swarming the chamber, their biomechanical claws slashing through the air. Lyra fought beside him, her alien dagger a blur of silver as she parried the towering Dravex leader's attacks, her white hair wild and her emerald eyes blazing with unyielding fire. Zara clung to the heart, her hands trembling on the crystal, her violet eyes wide with desperation as she tried to stabilize its power. The guardian outside loomed through the viewport, its colossal form of liquid metal and organic curves lancing blue energy at the Dravex ships, scattering them like leaves in a storm. But the heart's faltering pulse threatened to undo it all, and Zara's words, "We need more, Jonah, more of us," hung in the air, a challenge that resonated deep in Jonah's soul. He dodged a Dravex claw, his shoulder burning from an earlier graze, and fired a shot that sent the attacker staggering. "Zara, hold on," he shouted, his voice raw but steady, his eyes flicking to her. She was a vision of determination, her silver-threaded bodysuit glowing under the heart's light, her elfin ears twitching as she poured her will into the crystal. Lyra spun, her dagger locking against the Dravex leader's armor, and shot Jonah a fierce grin. "She's right, human," she panted, her voice a sultry growl despite the chaos. "The heart needs us, all of us, together." Jonah's heart thudded, not just from the battle but from the weight of their bond, a connection that had grown from a spark to a flame in the span of a single night. 30 years of solitude had taught him to survive, but Lyra and Zara had awakened something more, a need to protect, to belong, to love. He nodded, his resolve hardening. "Then let's finish this," he said, holstering his pistol and stepping toward the heart, his boots echoing on the metal floor. The Dravex leader lunged, its claws aiming for Lyra, but Jonah was faster, tackling her out of the way. They hit the ground together, her body warm and lithe beneath his, her breath hot against his neck. For a fleeting moment, their eyes locked, her emerald gaze softening with something that made his chest ache. "Not bad for a hermit," she murmured, a playful edge to her voice that eased the tension. "Save the compliments for after we're not dead," Jonah quipped, helping her up with a wry smile. He turned to Zara, who was trembling, her hands still on the heart, her face flushed with effort. The Dravex were regrouping, their growls filling the chamber, but the heart's light flared as Jonah and Lyra joined her, their hands reaching for the crystal together. The moment their fingers touched the heart, a surge of energy coursed through them, a tidal wave of warmth and power that bound their wills into one. Jonah felt it, Lyra's fierce determination, Zara's gentle strength, his own stubborn humanity, merging in a harmony that was both exhilarating and profound. The chamber blazed with light, the heart's hum rising to a resonant song that drowned out the Dravex's snarls. Outside, the Guardian responded, its blue energy surging, obliterating a Dravex ship in a brilliant explosion that lit up the void. The Dravex leader roared, charging forward, but the heart's power erupted in a shockwave, sending the mercenaries crashing against the walls, their mechanical limbs sparking and failing. Jonah's vision swam, the connection overwhelming, but he held fast, his hands locked with Lyra and Zara's. "Focus," he growled, his voice a tether in the storm. "We've got this." Zara's eyes fluttered open, her violet gaze meeting his, filled with a trust that made his heart soar. "I see it," she whispered, her voice trembling with awe. "The Guardian, it's ours. We can command it." Lyra's grip tightened, her emerald eyes fierce but warm. "Then do it, sister," she said. "End this." Zara nodded, her fingers pressing deeper into the heart, her will merging with Jonah and Lyra's. The Guardian's light intensified, its energy lancing through the remaining Dravex ships, reducing them to debris in a matter of seconds. The chamber fell silent, the alarms fading, the Dravex defeated, their lifeless forms scattered across the floor. The heart's pulse steadied, its light softening to a gentle glow, and the Guardian outside hovered, its presence no longer a threat but a protector, awaiting their command. Jonah released the heart, his body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. He stepped back, his eyes flicking between Lyra and Zara, who were equally breathless, their faces radiant in the afterglow of their victory. The air between them was charged, the bond they'd forged lingering like a tangible thread. We did it," he said, his voice rough, a rare smile breaking through his grizzled exterior. Lyra laughed, a sound that was both regal and unguarded, her white hair cascading over her shoulders. "You sound surprised, Jonah Kane," she teased, stepping closer until her warmth was a whisper against his skin. "Did you doubt us?" Zara moved to his other side, her violet eyes shimmering with emotion. "He didn't doubt," she said softly, her hand brushing his, her touch a quiet promise. "He believed, that's why we're here." Jonah's throat tightened, the weight of their words sinking in. The heart had chosen him, not just as a survivor but as a partner, a protector, a man worthy of these two extraordinary women. He looked at them, Lyra's fierce beauty, Zara's gentle warmth, and felt something he hadn't in decades, hope. "You two are trouble," he said, his voice gruff but laced with affection. "But I guess I'm stuck with you now." Lyra's smile was wicked, her emerald eyes glinting with mischief. "Stuck? "Oh, human, you make it sound like a chore." She leaned in, her lips brushing his ear as she whispered, "You'll find we're worth the trouble." Zara's cheeks flushed, but her smile was bold, her fingers intertwining with his. "We're not going anywhere," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "Not unless you want us to." Jonah's heart thudded, the idea of them leaving a pang he couldn't ignore. He'd lived alone for 30 years, but the thought of returning to that silence now was unbearable. "Stay," he said, the word slipping out before he could stop it. "This station's a mess, but it's home, and it's big enough for 3. The heart's light pulsed once, as if in approval, and the guardian outside shifted, settling into a protective orbit around Aurora's end. The station was no longer a relic of a forgotten past, but a beacon of a new future. A future where a human and 2 Auralian princesses could forge something extraordinary. Lyra and Zara exchanged a glance, their smiles a silent agreement, and for the first time in decades, Jonah felt the weight of solitude lift, replaced by a warmth that promised more than survival. As they left the core chamber, their footsteps echoing in the quiet, Jonah glanced back at the heart, its glow now steady, a testament to their unity. The galaxy was vast, full of dangers and mysteries, but with Lyra's fire and Zara's light by his side, Jonah knew he was ready for whatever came next. Aurora's end was no longer the end, it was a beginning.